would you describe your work at the Writing Center?
As one of the most gratifying parts of my professional life. The Writing Center brings together students from over 350 classes and consultants who have various areas of expertise, and they talk about writing. So it's a great position.
And what brought you to CSU?
Wonderful colleagues. Really strong sense of community and purpose, and a commitment to teaching and working with students.
And what do you enjoy most about your work?
Meeting people like you.
Oh, thank you.
Working with students, working with creative people. Yeah.
Let's see. And why are the humanities important?
For every reason you can imagine. I think especially right now, we need to really be focused on communicating in civil and productive ways. I think the humanities really focuses on that. And it teaches us a lot of strategies, not only for communicating well, both verbally and in writing, but for critically thinking and assessing situations, which we know is absolutely vital in a democracy.
And what has had the greatest influence on your career path?
That's a really good question. I wish I'd thought about that in advance. I think my own role as a first-generation college student. My parents both got degrees, associate's degrees, later in life. But when I was growing up, so much about the university was kind of a mystery to me. And so I wanted to learn it and understand it, and I really enjoy working with first-generation college students for that reason.
Great. And what are you working on? Any special projects right now?
Yes. In the Writing Center, we're working on developing synchronous online consultations, but in my own research, I am working on some research, qualitative study that colleague Sue Doe and I developed for post 9/11 veterans who are enrolled here at CSU. And in the fall, I'm going to be on a sabbatical, and I'll be working on a book on vintage and the role of vintage and retro things in our culture.
Well, I'll just jump to one of the other questions since you mentioned that real quick. I've heard via Jill that you're a fan of flea markets, and do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there's a whole area of research called cultural materialism. And feminist cultural materialism in particular is really interesting to me. And I think that we as human beings have a different relationship to things, different than we've ever had in history. And we're kind of in this position of negotiating contradictory notions of how we should feel about things. On the one hand, being a good citizen means buying things. So after post 9/11, what were you supposed to do? Go shopping, right? On the other hand, we're a part of a Judeo-Christian tradition that says, you don't build your treasures on earth, you build them in heaven. So there are these conflicting notions of what it means to have a healthy relationship to things. And I think that's changing. And I think that as a thing theory scholar, Bill Brown, says, things use us as much as we use them. And we can look at the ways that things have their own agency. And I'm particularly interested in how old things have agency in today's culture. That we look upon antiques or vintage items and we use them and they circulate through emotional economies in very different ways than new things. And so that's what I'll be working on and writing about while I'm on my sabbatical.
Cool. Who or what inspires you?
So many people. I mean, too many people to name. Many of my colleagues who are really dedicated to students and give it their all. I'm inspired by my mom and dad. My father was in the Army for 26 years, and my mother was a nurse later in life, and they really worked hard. I'm also inspired by research that focuses on social justice and making the world a better place.
Awesome. And what is the last piece of writing you read or wrote, or what are you currently reading/writing?
I just wrote a presentation, an essay, and I presented part of it at our national conferences, College Composition and Communication Conference, on hoarding. And the way that we talk about the material conditions of hoarding and the kind of empathetic responses that people do or don't have to the concept of hoarding, which gets a lot of press today. So that was the most recent thing that I wrote. And I'm also working on an article on make-dos, which are a category of antique collectibles that are really interesting to me. And I'm interested in how they represent women's work and feminist notions of understanding material culture. What accomplishments am I most proud of? I'm proud of my work with students. I'm proud of fostering the Writing Center to grow. I'm very proud of our new composition placement program, which is a real experiment in giving students agency and choice and opening up possibilities for them in terms of writing.
What don't your colleagues know about you?
This question came up recently at a retreat, and so some colleagues do know about me, but my father was in the Army, and he did several tours of duty in Vietnam. And when I was 3.5, 4 years old, he returned from his first tour of duty in Vietnam, and we met him on the airstrip at the Presidio, which at that time was an Army base in San Francisco. Well, it just so happened that a young politician named Richard Nixon was running for office, and Nixon came to the runway and was present when hundreds of these troops returned from their tours of duty in Vietnam. And somewhere out there is a picture of Richard Nixon kissing my 3.5-year-old self. And if anyone can find it, I'd really like to have it. This is family lore, but somehow I feel like it's true.
Let's see. Okay, well, let's see. Do you want to do one or two more? Do you want? Okay. What's your favorite word and why?
My favorite word would have to be imbricated, because I had a professor who used that word quite often, and in the 90s was criticized in an editorial in the New York Times for being an English academic who was not using language that was accessible to everybody. And he said, well, doctors of medicine don't use language that's accessible to everybody. And I think we need to realize that different discourse communities use different forms of language. That professor has since died, so as a kind of homage to him, I use the word imbricated in everything that I publish.